Yeah, so today we look into the data lake architecture. So before going to the data lake architecture, so let me first tell you like why we are using this data lake architecture. So what was the reason like we introduced to this data lake architecture? So before going to the data lake, so I will introduce to a small tool called the Metabase. So afterwards, Yashika will give a detail in like detail of this Metabase. So I will give a brief overview of this because this is connected with the data lake. So basically, Metabase is the presentation tool. Like with the help of Metabase, we can create reports. Like for example, if you go to metabase.prod.svchub.com and go to in the collection section, so there are different types of reports. You can see here in the 18. So many users have created different types of reports here. So for these reports, can anyone tell what is the most important thing? For creating reports, like what is required, like the most important thing? Anybody? No? So for creating reports, the most important thing is data. So without data, we can't create reports. So we'll not have all this data and we can't create various pie charts and all this. So for this, we need a data. So basically in our company, like we are using multiple databases. So if I go in database section here, so there are various multiple types of databases here. So in this, there are some databases which uses PostgreSQL. So you might have aware of this PostgreSQL. And some are using Cloudflare D1 database. So if you go to Cloudflare, so we have a section called uh, D1 SQL database. So we have almost 71 databases we are using from Cloudflare, which is also SQL database. So this is one type of database we are using for our existing applications. Now another, in some applications, we are using PostgreSQL, so which is deployed in our local server. So the problem is that like, so we can connect PostgreSQL directly with the Metabase to register any database. Like for example, this is AI Lite LLM. So this database is coming from PostgreSQL. So this we can directly connect. We can add new. So I don't have admin access. So in admin access, there is an option to add new database. And when we click on that add new database, there is we can give the database host name and all that SQL string. And it will just insert all the tables and databases into the Metabase for displaying and for creating reports. But in the case of the databases which are present in the Cloudflare, so they can't directly connect to the Metabase. That is one limitation of Metabase. So if I go here, so D1 can't directly connect with BI tools like Metabase. So because Metabase supports the traditional database connections. So when we create any schema or database in the Metabase, so we require that connection string and host name and all that. But in the D1, which is the serverless API-based access, so for that we don't have any URL and all that. So we are using Wrangler file configuration. So everything is serverless. So you can't directly connect to that Metabase for generating the reports. So that's why this data lake came into picture. So basically, we got this problem in that. So what we did, we had two options. So first was like moving everything, these 71 databases to the PostgreSQL in our own server, so which was not a feasible option. So second option was using the data lake architecture. So that we have implemented. So if I go here, next slide. So now what is data lake? So we have understood why we are going to use data lake. because we are not able to connect directly the D1 databases to the metabase. So we are going to use the metabase. This data lake has a middleware for that. So data lake is just a centralized analytic storage layer that collects data from multiple databases. Their sources means databases. So in this diagram, you can see, so this D1 database, database 2, database 3. So these are multiple Cloudflare databases like this one, like user management, this management and others. So we can combine these multiple databases and we can just store into the R2 bucket in the Parquet format. So Parquet format means the columnar format. So there are various types of format like JSON format and all others. So there is one format called Parquet format, which stores the data in the R2 bucket in the Cloudflare in the columnar format. So this we are using for the storing the data in the R2 bucket. So this R2 bucket is nothing but the data lake that we are going to use. So I will show that bucket where it is. So if I go here in the R2 object storage, so there is data lake bucket playtest there for the respective environment. So but basically what we are doing, we are storing the databases, like all the database from D1 database, from these databases. We have that in the D1 SQL database to this R2 storage. From there, we are going to fetch it to metabase. If I go to this here, so this is the databases. We are using reports API. So there is one API called reports API. So if you go to GitHub, so there is one API, a reporting framework. So which is, there are multiple APIs in this. So if I go to humanize.iq slash API slash report dot slash docs, so there are API for fetching the data from SQL and only fetching the schemas and items. So what I'm doing here, like, in the data lake architecture, so I'm using the reports API. First of all, I will fetch all the schemas and databases items, all the data from this database tables into reports API. And I will use and I will store this into the R2 bucket that I showed earlier, so which is the data lake. And for this, we are using Trino. So Trino is just, you can say, query engine. So it is a query engine which is acts as a middleware, which is used to move the data and read the data. So it is used for like inserting the data from the reports API to the R2 bucket, that is data lake, which we are storing in the Parquet format. And this iceberg is nothing but the part of the Trino, which is responsible for creating the table format in the inside R2. So for like storing the data inside R2 storage, we need some table format also there. So this iceberg is responsible for creating the schema and structure, and Trino is responsible for inserting the data and reading the data, fetching the data from this R2 bucket and fetching it to metabase. So this is the whole flow, like this data lake architecture flow. So like instead of directly connecting to D1 to metabase, so we are going through this Trino and R2 bucket. So this is called all the data lake architecture. So we are using this. So basically for this, we are using, there are multiple anytime workflows which are responsible for executing all this flow. So I will show you that anytime workflows one by one. So before going to that anytime workflows, so is there any doubt till now? You can ask any questions. There's any doubt? Yes.
Yeah, Praniket, in that slide you showed in Trevino, there is an ingest method and inside that query method. What is the difference there?
Where? In
Uh,
this one.
yeah,
Okay.
In Trino, there is an ingest and a query. What is that?
So in Trino, like, so this part of the Trino is responsible for insertion of data. Like we are taking all the data from the Cloudflare database and using the Trino, we are creating, like executing the insert statements, Trino statements, and we are just inserting. That is called ingest. And here in the query, we are just fetching. Like we are using select Trino execution statements for displaying into the metabase. So if I go here in metabase, so we have section called Trino. So if I click on this, so your Trino like fetches all these databases in the into the metabase using that second Trino implementation. So these are all the R2 like buckets which are created. So these are all the database, Cloudflare database, but these are not directly the Cloudflare databases. These are the R2 buckets. So I can, these are all the data coming from R2 bucket, that is data lake, not directly from the Cloudflare. So that is the difference. Like first one is used to insert and second one is to fetch using training. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Any other doubts? Shall we proceed further? Okay, so we'll go further. So now I will show you the N18 workflows. So there are mostly this all this workflow. Just I show that architecture, all everything I showed you. So this all is implemented through this three workflows. There are mainly three workflows: part one, part two, part three. So I will show you the one by one. So the first is using and it's part two, part three. So I will show you the first one. So what first one does is that it will sync the database schema into the reporting API. So basically, so this is the reporting framework that I have created, which is a API project. So this has its own database. So if I go to D1 SQL, so if I go to D1 SQL database, so there is called database name reports. So in this, what we are doing, we are registering the database. In future, if someone like, if you want to insert any new database in future into the data lake, so we are using these tables to like insert the sources. So currently this sources table you see here. So this contains all the databases which are there in the currently there in data lake. So like user management, prompt manager. So these all are there in data lake. So which are used by metabase in the Trino section we saw here. So this all you are seeing Trino. So these all the database are just nothing but these sources which are registered here. So what we are doing in this first workflow, this is the part one, schema sync reporting API. So what we are doing, like first, so there are three workflows actually. So which are we are scheduling the trigger after 15 minutes. Like for each 15 minutes, it will trigger. Like after each 15 minutes, it will trigger that workflow. So we have set it to 15 minutes. And so it will just first of all get the credentials, whatever which are required. Like there are many credentials like data lake credentials. So from the config manager. So have you guys has anyone conducted section for config manager earlier? Or not yet? So basically, config manager is used to like there is one API called config manager a database where we are storing all the credentials. So we are not hard coding anything here, like any sensitive data like API and all that. So we are using config manager to fetch the credentials. So in future, if anyone may take the session regarding config manager. They will explain you in brief, like in detail. So this is we are getting first credentials from config manager, which are required for data lake purposes. Then what we are doing, we are list the sources. Like we are fetching the sources. The sources means this databases. What you have entered here in this. So how we are entering this databases. So we have a UI also for that. If I go to this, so if you go to humanizeIP.ai/data lake management. So this is a UI for data lake management. So where we can register any source. So let's say any one of you have a new database that needs to be registered in data lake. So what you can do, like data lake team will register that source. So it will have that source name, source type, base URL and all. And it will register it. So once it is registered, it will register into the reporting API, into the sources table. So it will add a record here. And once the record is added, so it will fetch to that NA10. So it will fetch all the records, sources, what you are needed. And for each source, like it will have a loop. So for example, we have multiple sources like Craft Studio, user management. So for each source, it will execute one workflow, which is called initialize new tables. So if I click on this is another table. So this is another sub workflow. So this is responsible. I will not go into detail because this is no need to go into detail. So this is the workflow which is responsible for creating the tables and columns in the reporting API. So if I go here in the reporting API, so for example, if I registered a source called Craft Studio. So for this Craft Studio database, we will have some tables, right? So these tables, what that part one does, it will register all the tables here in this table, the table registry with the table ID and source ID, table name, and what are the primary keys for that, what are the updated columns and all the other data. So it will all insert all the columns required and tables and columns also. And columns in this table, in table columns, like for the table ID, column name and all, whatever we have. So mainly that part one does, it just gathers all the information from the Cloudflare D1 to the reports API. So if I go to that architecture, so part one is doing this work. It is just fetching all the table schema and items into reporting API and storing it in the database. So this is the part one. So this table sources, table columns, and table registry. And also it adds the ingest state for reference purpose. And it will add that watermark, like for by default, you will add 1970 here. Like for the first time, if there is any database, it will add this default watermark. And for the next time, it will just go on updating the watermark once the new items are coming. So this is the mainly part one. It just what it does, it just only syncs the database. It adds the columns, table schemas into reporting API. That is the part one. So the part one is done. So after part one, part two is executed. So what part two does? So it creates the schemas and table in the data lake. So now we haven't gone into the data lake yet in the R2 bucket. So what this does, once that all the data we have in the reporting API, all the columns and tables and tables we have in that reporting API, then what it does, it will create the schema here in the R2 bucket and table for that in the data lake. So it will get first of all schedule the trigger, same thing. It will run up for the 15 minutes. And it will get credentials from the config manager. And it will fetch the sources, the available databases from the API. Then it will, for each source ID, it will go into loop. So it will go into loop for each source, for each database. It will create the tables in the data lake. So this is calling create tables in data lake workflow. So which is another sub workflow. So if I go here, so this is responsible create tables in data lake. So this is this creates the tables in schemas in data lake. Just you are seeing this. So this all thing, it creates all the tables and schemas here. So if I go into anything, we can't read that because it is in Parquet format. So for example, you can see this. So these are the table names, and inside that there are some data and all. So this all schemas and all just created in the part two. This is done in the part two mostly. After that, part three, which is most important. So part three used to insert the data, actual data from the D1 to the R2 bucket. So using tree node. So if I go back to that, this one. So now the part three is what we'll do. Now we have all the schemas and all that. So part three will, using help of the tree node, it will fetch all the data, like all the table items and all the rows and items data, and insert into the R2 bucket. So that is the part three. It syncs all the data. So again, same, it will schedule the trigger for 15 minutes, get the credentials from config manager. So it will create ingestion run, like it will for every workflow, it has a run ID, so which is stored for the reference purpose. If I go here, so ingest run table, there is a run ID for each workflow. So at every time when the workflow runs, there is a unique run ID, which is stored for the reference purpose. And then after that, it will just check the tables, whatever tables are present for that, and it will split into the items. And the next important thing is that, so after getting all the tables and schemas, so now he has all the data here. We have got all the data. Now we are splitting it into items to store it into the R2 bucket. So before that, what we are going to do, we are going to log the table. So we have a function called like table lock release controller. So there is another independent workflow, so which is used for locking the table. So why we are using this? So to prevent the duplication, data duplication. For example, in the future, let's say we are going to create a new database, and we are going to register it into the data lake. So, but that data base has like 8,000 items. So the data like that workflow will not it will be not sufficient. That timing, 15 minutes timing will not be sufficient for that all the 8,000 items to store in that single time. So what will do, like after that, the 15 minutes timer will again run. So that earlier workflow which is running, let's say it is running till 3,000 items. And after that, again, that 15 minutes trigger will happen. The next workflow will again like start from first. So that in that case, we will have that duplication. Like the earlier workflow is also running, and the next workflow after 15 minutes is also running. So in order to like prevent this duplication, so we are using a lock. So once basically we are starting this part three, we are locking the table. So once the table is locked, so the another there is another workflow which is triggered after 15 minutes. So it will not take, it will look for the table lock. So if it is a table lock, then it will skip the workflow. It will not execute. So unless the earlier workflow is executed completely, then it will release the lock. And then the next workflow will run. So in this way, we'll not have duplicate values. For that thing, we are using that table lock. So in the part three, we are using this table lock here. So every time we are like inserting the data items, we use a table lock. And after all the data items are inserted, we release the table lock. So for every loop, basically for every table, for each table, basically we are inserting the table, like all the items into the data lake. So this is the workflow which is responsible, called sync single table. So which is responsible for like inserting the database items into that respective table. So I show you. So for each table, this part three, so this data lake will run for each table. Like we have four tables to be inserted in data lake. So it will run four times and it will sync all that items into that data lake. So this is the workflow which is insert all that tables and it will check for all the existing schemas and tables also. This is the mostly the overview of part one. So I will explain again like what mostly the part one, part two, part three does. So if I go back to slide, the part one just it will what will do. First it will check the source, like we have added the new whether we have added any new database or not. So if any new database is added into the reporting API, it will just insert the fetches the column names, table names from the reporting API, like from the Cloudflare D1 and insert it into reporting API database using reporting API endpoints. So this is the part one. Part two, it will create the table structure inside R2. Like we have shown them in the data lake bucket. It will create just a schema and tables. Here it will not insert any items and all. So after creating this table structure, it will just sync the actual data from D1 to R2. Like it will all add the items into the R2 via the tree node. So this is the mainly the part one, part two, part three. So which is covers this all workflow architecture. This using this part one, part two, part three. Basically, we are using the data lake architecture flow, and then we have all the data now in the R2 bucket. So we can use Trino to create the reports using Metabase, and we can have data in Metabase. So this Metabase is used by many other applications. Like you must have observed in the stand-up meeting, like we are showing the email and all that. The data from the email, uh, that data and email thing is also using data lake in the backend to fetch all the data and all to receive the emails. Now, so there are other applications which are using data lake. So this is the main like purpose of the data lake, why we are using. Yeah, that's it from my side. So do you have any doubts, any questions? Yes.
Praniket, actually, if we update the table lock, as you said we will do table lock. Then, if we update the database take time to get up, go into, or some problem will happen. I must.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, if we you said we will log the data, then send it to Metabase, right? So that time, if the updation of tables happens, what will happen?
So it will take for the next iteration, like for the
Okay.
like to take for next iteration. So like it will release the table lock, like every part three workflow. Once the data item is done, to release the table lock, and it will be ready for other workflows to execute that. The next time it will take the updated one. So yeah, make sure to fill that feedback form. And any other questions? Like, and this is a bit complex thing, like how the data lake workflows and all. But yeah, like in future, if anyone like will come into the data lake team, so I will explain him again in detail all the workflows. So for now, just I have given the overview of the data lake workflows. So there are much more in detail in that workflows. That's any other questions? No? Can we end the session? Yeah, sure. Okay, so we will end the session. So thank you for your time. If you have any questions, you can ping me on the Slack regarding data. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Bye.